So I want to thank Mickey Parrish, because about 6 months ago he came to me and asked me if I wanted to speak on this topic with the yes side of things, and I said, of course, coming from my industry experience, because what I'm about to talk about is not FDA's view on the matter. So I said, sure, I can do that, and I started thinking about it, and I thought, whoa, wait a minute. We've got to find out what you're considering sustainability. Because as I started talking with various colleagues in the food industry, the third-party audit groups, extension, educators, I started finding that there's not a lot of consensus on what food safety and sustainability, what that means, what that paradigm is. So based on my experience when I was in the industry, I considered sustainability as conserving resources, things like water, energy, lights, also reducing the carbon footprint. That would be things such as waste reduction efforts, recycling, particularly packaging. So in order to validate my own thinking, I asked my colleagues, as I mentioned, the extension, large corporations, government, and as well as third-party audits. And so when I talked to the third-party audit group, basically what they explained to me is that they had a sustainability scheme that they were using where they focused on the 3 pillars of sustainability. The first one being social. This is really focused on health and safety. So is that really treading on food safety? As we looked at it, probably not. Economic, the definition here based on who I talked to was this is where you look at the energy efficiency. And again, that's probably really not the pillar that's treading on food safety. But when we started talking about the environmental pillar, this is where I started thinking, I need to talk to more folks to get examples of how such things as water conservation and perhaps waste management are indeed treading on food safety. So when I talked to my government colleague, and this is a person that's in the produce arena doing produce audits, basically his first point was there is no consensus on what sustainability is, and that's creating a problem. The sustainability audits are fairly new, the standards, the requirements, they're new, whereas food safety is very mature. So his comment was, as he looked at what some of the farmers were doing as far as sustainability, they really didn't understand it, and they didn't understand the consequences if they didn't do it right. So his point was industry, some of on the produce side, may be confused about what sustainability is and how they can manage it within their food safety system. The next person I talked to, very, very enlightening, because he started giving me examples. This was from the extension community. And I says, well, give me some examples in, again, the produce arena where maybe folks are trying to reduce waste, but yet there's food safety implications. He gave me 2 very good examples. Reuse of packaging. There's some situation where farmers may be using corrugated containers to actually transport produce to their customers or to farmers markets. And when they get to these locations, they break down the corrugated fiber containers, put it down next to the irrigation ditch or here or there, and then they reuse the material, creating that cross-contamination. Not even really thinking about it, but they're being sustainable, right, from the waste. Now another example, and I didn't really know that much about green tea compost. What it is it's made from grass clippings, And again, from a waste reduction point, they're thinking that this is a good way to go. But when you start thinking about the food safety implications of that, I don't know about you dog owners, but you know, dog feces can be in grass clippings as well as pesticides. So perhaps that wasn't really thought through. All right, now I'm going to shift to my third-party auditor colleague. His point was, we all know we need to do food safety, right? That's just ingrained in us now. But we may be taking it for granted because it's always, well, not always, most often the quality manager in the facility that has to assume all of these responsibilities of food safety. And now there's non-GMO, gluten-free, organic, and sustainability. They've got so much to do with limited resources that here again, I think, and my colleague thought, that this is another example of how sustainability could be treading on food safety. All right, now I go to my corporate QA colleague, and I asked him, what do you think? And he says, well, Kathy, really where I see this occurring is there's a lot of pressure right now to meet sustainability performance standards. You may have heard about some of the buyer sustainability index, where actually now buyers are asking their suppliers to provide water use numbers, waste numbers, and they're going to reward their suppliers by how well they do in these conservation efforts. Buyers' scorecards, performance goals. So there was one individual I talked to that said, yes, their standard was for their supplier to reduce water usage by 15%. So if we think now from a food safety perspective, I'm going to use an example of, this is probably more in the processor side of things, but water usage in dump tanks or say flume water used for produce purposes. So there was a situation where this particular processor wanted to reduce the water usage, and so they got rid of their flume system and they started a spray system without validating the food safety aspects of that system. So the downside, without education, there could be misuse of conservation practices that could affect food safety. So my answer is yes, sustainability is treading on food safety, but if I can just show my last slide here, co-management is really the answer. This is from the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources, and they make a very good point about blending food safety and sustainability goals to optimize both. And that we really need to have food safety people on these sustainability teams, that they need to reference if the practices are going to have consequences and do crosswalk of the standards and get the standard right, provide the education. Thank you.
Brent?
Thanks, Joe. Thank you, Kathy, very much. Thank you for inviting me. I had a week to prepare. I was driving to work, and I got a call to pinch hit for someone. I'm a toxicologist, so pity votes are generally welcome. So I'm going to take a different approach. I'm going to look at this issue holistically. Food safety is not just about the food we eat, but it's how it's produced. It's how it's sustained through the whole supply chain. Sustainability, we also can't silo that. As Kathy pointed out, and I agree with her, there's many aspects of sustainability. But what I want to talk about today are 3 points that I think are absolutely key. Not only do I believe that sustainability is not treading on food safety, but fundamentally, if you want a business or your government regulatory body or academic lab to thrive, it can't, period, end of sentence. It just can't. Because without food safety, how are you sustainable? You can't be sustainable without food safety. So 3 points I want to make is something about responsibility, integrity, as well as the culture by which you operate. If your food's not safe, if the ingredients aren't safe, if how the food's produced isn't safe, how can you be responsible? And without responsibility, how can you have sustainability? It's impossible. You can't do that. We at General Mills, we have many sustainability efforts that we take pride in. In our Fridley facility, where we manufacture oat flour for all the oat flour that goes into our Cheerios, we have a biomass generator that takes the oat hulls, burns them, which provides 90% of the steam and energy we need to make oat flour. Additionally, we provide additional oat hulls to a local biomass generator that generates energy for 7,000 homes in the existing area. Kathy brought up water reusage. We use water reuse. We save 56 million gallons of water in our Progresso soup line by reusing cooling water and recycling that cooling water to cool our cans after thermal processing initiatives have taken place. So one, responsibility. You have to be responsible. Without responsibility, you can't have sustainability. And before responsibility, you have to have food safety. Tony Dungy once stated that integrity is what you do when no one is watching. It's doing the right thing at all the time, even when it may work to your disadvantage. Look, we are not putting our heads in the sand saying that sustainability isn't a driver for how people do business nowadays. The consumers demand it, but they expect food safety before they demand sustainability. Sustainability is voluntary. If you think of it, it is voluntary. Sometimes it may work to your disadvantage if it treads on food safety initiatives. And like Kathy said, I did read that UC Davis article on co-management in the produce facility. Food safety must be an integral part of any initiative you have, let alone just food sustainability. Culture. What is the building blocks of any food manufacturing culture or any academic culture studying food safety or any regulatory agency? The foundation is always safety, whether that's food safety or human safety. The foundation and the cornerstone by which all of you are here is that food safety drives trust. Without it, you can't drive trust. Therefore, safety must come, and it must be the foundation by which we do anything. Before any initiatives, sustainability is one of those initiatives. But if you put sustainability ahead of food safety, you may be successful for a little while by driving that point home, but I guarantee you, and there's examples in the past, where food safety was put on the back burner or was not the foundation of a particular group, industry, etc. And where are those groups now? They don't exist. How is that sustainable? So you have to have food safety. Food safety is the cornerstone of what we do, why we're all here, and the cornerstone of any successful business. And from food safety, it allows you, once you have the food safety buttoned up from farm to fork, it allows you to delve into different initiatives such as sustainability and other efforts. Thanks.
So Kathy will now have 3 minutes for rebuttal.
Well, Brett, good job there. I agree with a lot of your points, but I'd like to just discuss a couple. As far as sustainability, you mentioned it's voluntary. Well, it may be voluntary within your corporation, but are you really making it voluntary for your suppliers and your suppliers? And what I mentioned before is I'm not seeing sustainability being totally voluntary, particularly with the various buyers, particularly in the retail environment, that are making this a requirement. They're driving the sustainability. And they may not always be providing the instructions or the education along with that. I'm glad you mentioned culture. That's such an important aspect that I'm so glad to hear you say that food safety is the foundation and it always should be. But the point is, if some folks don't understand how sustainability can be managed within their food safety system, even if they've got the culture, it's possible that food safety will fail. The integrity, yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly there. Integrity, we're always looking at that. Your responsibility, thank you for your savings statistics on the water usage, but I noticed you only talked about the product, non-product contact water. But what about your efforts for product contact water, reuse and CIP systems, that type of thing, and the food safety considerations that have to come along with that? So I think those are my main points at this juncture.
All right, Brent, you got 3 minutes?
Kathy, thank you again. Those are great points you brought up. You know, in your talk, you talked about confusion. But confusion doesn't necessarily have to be a problem with food or leading to food safety issues. It might be a contributing factor. In my short tenure, I'm a relatively young guy, 6 years in the industry, but I have never seen, or very few limited times, where one food safety event is caused by one thing. Generally, it's multiple things that have failed that lead to a food safety event. When we talk about reuse of water, a problem with sustainability are we seeing these, to your points, is it a problem with sustainability or is it a problem with education to follow basic HACCP principles? So when you talk about reuse of water, whether you're washing vegetables, that still doesn't negate the fact that you have to follow basic HACCP principles in order to follow critical control points or control points downstream to mitigate the potential hazards in your evaluation through prerequisite programs, through hazard analysis, et cetera. Sustainability efforts and knowledge of those sustainability efforts should go into that hazard analysis in the production of the finished product. You bring up pesticides, that's kind of in my wheelhouse. Using grass and tea leaves and grass clippings. Pesticides are highly regulated, as you know. EPA sets the tolerance levels here in the US and FDA enforces those tolerance levels. I've failed to see in your argument specific food safety events that have occurred that have been directly correlated to sustainability efforts. And even if there are 1 or 2 or 3 examples out there, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of sustainability efforts for every 1 or 2 events. And so does that mean that sustainability is treading on food safety or that food safety is winning? I tend to believe in the latter. There are many examples of how sustainability, based on your 3 pillars, how they can be utilized, and I'm just not seeing it. We need to be very important, though, however, as you alluded to in education, that we must include food safety initiatives along with sustainability efforts, and they need to sit at the same table.
Thank you. We have the opportunity for questions now. Yep, please move to the microphone.
Hi. Excuse me. My name is Pete Cashnovo. I'm the sanitarian for the University of Rochester, and I oversee about 10 million meals from a food preparation standpoint, not production, so at the final end. A root question I have for you is, do fruit flies spread pathogenic diseases through food to people? Because over the years, when we talk about recycling, reuse, when we talk about equipment that helps do that, including composting, I've seen a huge increase in the number of fruit flies that are very difficult to control in these settings, especially dish machines and dish rooms and that kind of thing. So my real question is, do these kind of small filth flies spread disease? That could directly answer this question.
Before I begin, is that University of Rochester, New York?
Do I really need to? Yeah.
That's where I did my training, so that's why I'm asking. So thank you for the question.
We control the fruit flies, so.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a big fruit fly issue when you were?
I'm not an entomologist. I don't say that I'm an entomologist. Nor am I a microbiologist. It's very difficult for me to answer that question. I would say that, you know, with any sanitation event, you want to mitigate the risk that you see, whether that be food safety, regulatory, or quality risks. You need to mitigate those accordingly. But from a sheer scientific standpoint, is that a causation or an association of sustainability efforts? I don't know. So the short answer to your question, I don't know how to answer that question. Kathy, would you like to try?
Well, likewise, I don't have the experience with fruit flies, but I think there's an analogous situation here that if I could just comment on it, and how there can be vectors that can transfer pathogenic organisms. Going back to the sustainability efforts in the produce arena out in the farm level, they're actually using, taking environmental runoff and putting them into these sedimentation ponds, these reservoirs. And what they're finding is that part of a potential food safety issue that they didn't consider was the tadpoles that then become frogs that leap around in the leafy green fields that are transferring, their vectors transferring pathogenic organisms such as salmonella. So I don't know if fruit flies do the same thing or not. So.
Okay. Thank you. Martin?
Okay, Martin Wiedemann, Cornell University. So if we assume that food is never 100% safe, which we all probably agree on, and everything we do to produce food will always have some environmental impact, then the question becomes, how do we weigh sustainability against food safety? So if we can have data that say, these sustainability measures will prevent 10 illnesses, but permit one more foodborne illness by reducing air pollution, for example, how do we weigh? Because that's the bottom line. And does it encroach on food safety, but improve public health?
Martin, was that rhetorical? Yes, I think right now, because of the sustainability efforts and with it being, as my one colleague said, it's not as mature as food safety, I think there's a lot of data that needs to be collected, particularly from the, I think you're talking about the foodborne illness and the impact of that. So I would agree that there's a lot of studies and data collection that needs to be conducted to assess the outcomes.
So I'll answer that in terms of risk assessment. When we perform risk assessment, whether it be, you know, I tend to be more familiar with allergen risk assessment. Risk assessment should not be done to assess risk down to every last individual person. Rather, it should be population-based risk assessment. So if we believe that, it would rely heavily on what the risk assessment shows. And I think that in any effort, whether it be food sustainability, food safety initiatives, et cetera, a proper, thorough risk assessment needs to be evaluated to understand the true risk and do a risk-benefit analysis on what is the correct path.
We have one more question, and then we'll do our voting, please.
Hi, Dane Jensen from Mondelez. So with increased sustainability efforts, where do you see that encroaching on safety with allergens? Toxicologist, it's for...
Yeah, thank you. I don't see it encroaching on allergens as long as the discussion is being had before that sustainability effort is being put forth. So for instance, you know, we at General Mills, we own Old El Paso, and we use a lot of frying oils, et cetera. And part of the discussions I've been involved in is whether or not reusing that frying oil can have an additive effect of allergens running through that. So let's say you do a cheesy taco that goes through it, and then you run an original taco. The question is, are you going to have milk allergen being increased throughout those runnings as you reuse the same oil. And this is just a specific example, we actually did that testing to see, you know, is there detectable allergens, do we need to cross-label, et cetera. But with any allergen assessment, with any sustainability assessment, all these things need to be considered. And so that is just one example. Reusing a fryer oil is one example where allergenicity or the additive effect of particular proteins for product to product need to be considered. But just from a sanitation standpoint, do we need to wet clean or dry clean, et cetera? And what are the implications of those? Can we dry clean but still meet our allergen sanitation goals from one product to another product, or do we need to use water to get visibly clean and to a level at which it's spotless? But then you're introducing microbiological risk and you're using water. So those are just two examples that I can think of right off the top of my head where allergen concerns need to be considered.